Hey guys, thank you very much for watching this video. In this video, we'll discuss mostly about the MongoDB. As we know, MongoDB is one of the most widely used database in the industry nowadays. Right? It's all because of its flexibility and reliability. MongoDB is a document database. The meaning of document database is we use to store the data in a MongoDB in a format of documents. So the question is what is meaning of that? If I'm saying we are going to store the data in a format of document, what does it mean? If you are not aware of MongoDB, then let's come to SQL. How do we store the data in a SQL database? We used to store the data in a format of row and column. We used to have a table, right, for any kind of operation, whether we are going to storing some data in a database or we are going to fetch some data from the database, we must need a table. And this table is to have a data in a format of row and column, right? For each entry that we are going to store the data, we need to create one row in that SQL table. That is how it happened in a SQL. So for each entry, for each data, we used to have row and column. This is how we are going to store the data in SQL database. But what about the MongoDB? What about the NoSQL database? As you know, it's a document database. It's very clear that we are going to store the data in a format of document. The meaning of that, there is no concept of row and column here. In a simple way, you can say that you have a JSON object, right? You can store your JSON object directly in a MongoDB. MongoDB store the data in format of BSON. BSON is nothing but a binary JSON. It will look like JSON data only, so it's completely readable for a human also. That's a very simple, and you can simply see the data in a format of JSON whenever you query the data from the database. Okay, but before that, moving forward, let's see that if you talk about the MongoDB, so what are the difference pointers? What are the benefit that we are going to achieve if you are going for MongoDB? As you know, if you are going for a SQL, one of the biggest thing that I observe, the thing is the joins and relationship. Suppose you are going to store some data about the users, right? You may need to store the data in a multiple table, like user data you are storing in the user table, user address you are going to store in address table, user employment detail you are going to store in employment table, and some other information also you can store in some other tables, right? So whenever you are going to fetch the data from the database, you must need to have a join, and whenever join come into picture, the query execution will be slower. It will impact the performance. We used to have a foreign key in this kind of use cases, because for user data we are going to store the data in a multiple table, so somehow we need to have some unique ID to identify this data belong to this data, right? And this is really going to be complex. But whenever you are going for MongoDB, you will not observe this kind of problem, because you are simply storing the data in a format of document, not in a format of row and column. So you don't need to specify the multiple documents. It's not like we don't have provision to do that. Suppose you are going to store the data in a SQL database as well as in a NoSQL database. Now we'll see how it is going to be different. If you are going for SQL database, you need to insert the data in a five kind of data is there, so you need to store the data in a multiple table. It may be 5, 6 or whatever. But in case of NoSQL, you can simply store that JSON data in a JSON format, like in a BSON format. So you no need to worry about the multiple table, multiple collection, right? There is no concept of foreign key. There is no concept of row and column, right? So now we'll see, like, if you talk about the NoSQL database, does it mean that we have the same terminology in a NoSQL database as we have in a MySQL, right? So database, the term the database, we used to say the database in NoSQL or MongoDB. Table, we used to say it collection in MongoDB. Column means field. Row means documents. As I told, like, whenever we are going to store the data in a SQL database, we need to store the data in a format of row and column. For each entry, you need to insert one row. Here, the data is going to store in a format of document, right? In NoSQL database. Foreign key means sub-documents. Like, as we see, like, in SQL, we used to have foreign key if we have to build the relation between the data. But what if we have the same kind of relation and we are going to store the data in a NoSQL database? So we may have the references, we may have the sub documents, but it's not mandatory. It's just about, it depends upon you, like whether you want to store the whole data in a single document or you want to store the data in a different documents. You can simply create a sub documents and you can just provide the references. But why, when we are going to fetch the data, we don't need to do join in NoSQL database. That is the reason NoSQL database is very preferable and it is faster and it's very simple. Being a developer, it's a very simple, no doubt. Now we'll see that how the data is getting stored in SQL and non-SQL database. So if you talk about the SQL database, we have already seen that we need to store the data in a format of row and column. Here in this diagram on the right side, you can see that we have a multiple row like R1, R2, R3, right? And we have different column like C1, C2, C3, C7. So in this table we have 7 column and the number of rows, right? So this number of column is always fixed, means if the table is having 7 columns, so you can store only the 7 column data. If you are trying to store the data where you are sending 10 columns or more than 7 columns, it will simply throw the exception. But it doesn't happen in case of NoSQL database. In NoSQL database, since we are going to store the data in a format of document, not in a format of row and column, so it's a completely dynamic. The number of column is dynamic. So based on the requirement, you can just, for different records, you can have a different number of columns. But it doesn't happen in case of SQL. This is one of the biggest advantage that we used to get in NoSQL databases. You don't need to use any join here. You can simply get the data. Okay. So here you can see like how the data is getting stored in a case of SQL databases. So you can see that we have a 4 column: ID, name, email ID, and salary, and you have multiple rows like 5 rows, right? This is how it happened in case of SQL database. But what about the MySQL database? In MySQL database, we used to store the data in a format of JSON, right? Whatever the JSON format you have, you can simply store it in a NoSQL database. No need to do any additional operation for that. Okay, so it's quite simple. Being a developer, this is one of the most simplest and reliable database I have seen. Okay, thank you guys, thank you very much for watching this video.